just a glass tank, caulk washer that I have on it, dosing the Avast. I think I might move to putting the bucket down here, like I had showed. Deceptively simple. A little messy, not so photogenic, but I have all that stashed over into here. Should probably do a little bit of cord management, like a chiller that comes on. This one doses AFR, all for reef, off of the dose, and then the other dose doses caulk washer just inside of the ability for the top off to go off. And I would love to hide that top off, but the top off just sits over there. But it's engaged by a Vast Marine. Starting to have all these interactions between some of the corals that are bugging me. This bird's nest is grown over and is hitting this gorgonian, and then it's colliding with this one, and then where stuff is, they're fighting each other, then algae's jumping on there in their collision. So I might have to go through and prune to get them back off of each other. The thing of being cognizant what you're doing to someone else's workspace. I think you don't think of aquarium maintenance, you don't think of how you're affecting people's living area that you're coming into, but it's honestly, it's an important thing. So you see right here, here's the P-mup that's attached to an Avast Marine top off, but here is the line that goes to the dose. So without using metrics, like if evaporation is causing this much evaporation, I'm trying to figure out to get the dose to dose caulk washer like inside of here, to dose a certain amount of caulk washer while watching the alkalinity and effects on the aquarium. But I just want the regular top off to come off minimal. I used to have the caulk washer tied to the top off, and just I can't say enough how you should not do that. Even if you've been doing it for a long time, it's just a massive potential for bad things. There you see the skimmer going crazy. Remember, I always turn this over, flip it over. I can sort of tell by the way the bubbles are that this had been off. This had shut the skimmer off for a little bit because the bubbles are larger. And that's why I might end up changing this to a bucket. I'd like to collect a little more than that than what is happening. And again, I have not made water yet to flood it, but I'm doing the wet skimming, so if I'm not careful, I'm gonna engage the top off. So what I wanna do on that, in this situation, is unplug the top off. So, one of the first things that I should do before I do too much is check the alkalinity. I use this Tropic Marin one that gives me the alkalinity to a whole number, because I don't really care if it's 8.5, 8.7, 8.3, 9.2. I don't care that. I just want to know. It's just quick and easy. With the sample tube, I keep it clean. After I do the test, I will go rinse it and then rinse it with RODI water and then put it back in the backpack. But before I do a first test, I want to get water from the tank in there and really get it out, just in case. I'll do the same thing with the syringe. Actually sort of pump the syringe a little bit in the water, make sure there's no bubbles. I'll run it down to 5 mils. Get that in there. So this is, each drop represents 1 DKH. So 1, give it a little mixing, 6, 7, 8, uh-oh. So here, let me show you a little thing. I dripped it in there and I got a little bit of that reagent sort of stuck in there. So I want to carefully get most of that back into there because that could give me a false reading. A little tricky, but that might make this test a little suspect, a little squintable. So that was 8. That's where I want to be mostly. 9. Okay, then we might be a little high. 10, 10. Almost wanted to do a little change. 11. There's a good change there, but like I said, the way that test went down, I think it's a little squintable. So I'm going to run that again real quick. 9, 10. I've got some more in there again. 11. Boom. Okay, so I did it twice in a row, so I trust that. So 11's a little, I normally try to say 8 or 9. So then I'll go to the dose and I'm gonna bring it dosing the AFR down a little bit. I think I'm dosing 300 mils per day. So it's sort of arbitrary, but I'll probably bring it down to like 280. And then it's a whole nother week from when I'm here. I don't wanna jump it down fast. I'll bring it down a notch and then I'll see, you know, what I see. Last time that I tested it, it was in the high 9s. Of course, I would check the alkalinity first off before doing a water change because obviously the water change is gonna affect that and I wanna see what it is just coming into it. Again, for a long time now, I've been doing just these mesh bags and not felt. Does a minor amount of mechanical filtration, but my main reason for that is to catch fish, to catch hermit crabs, to catch snails. I don't want livestock coming into the sump. Also feel like it traps some some more coarse materials, and I feel like my protein skimmer is gonna pick up the rest of that. And there's so much coral coverage in here. You know, I'm sort of giving some detritus for filter feeding and whatnot. So I'm about to go do a task. I'm about to go clean these in the sink. But at the same time, I'm wet skimming. It would be super foolish to walk away from this. And so again, being careful when you're at someone's house and trying to avoid accidents. So what I'm gonna do is I could leave it running. I could run it way down so it doesn't wet skim anymore, or I can make it do a bare minimum. It depends how long I think I'm gonna be. So I'm just gonna turn it way down and then I'll take this stuff to the sink. So, you know, this seems funny, but there's the pipes right there, and then this was all custom by myself. You know, might look crazy, but it's something I did a long time ago. As I'm showing the system, the funny thing is I think that the assumption is that every client has like the latest and greatest thing, which, you know, would be the desire, but it's not really the reality. And it's funny, even clients that have a lot of money, it's not, from a maintenance standpoint, these are not completely my decisions. Could I get this out and put like a MRC sump or something like that? You know, that would be cool, but you have to put that to these clients and see if they want to upgrade. And you really have to ask yourself too, is it important? I mean, this tank does great, and it might seem crazy that I'm just here with a glass tank I put in there a long time ago, but the way that I've done it all, it completely works. Gotta clean them. Maybe we're in a little, just the ups and downs, in a little phase. This is another thing that happens is this one collects Mahano as well inside of it. So I try to take advantage of these Mahano collection besides trying to kill them as well. But it's observing what's going on with the tank and making changes accordingly. Water into a fancy house or something, to put these lids on for no splashing to try to minimize. I put these pop-off lids on the water when I'm coming into and out of most buildings or whatnot. If I'm doing buckets, I don't always do buckets, but in this instant, it's just easier for me to do buckets. So I minimize the amount of splashing on the floor and whatnot to just contain this. This office, a long time ago, I wanted to make water in here, but this is a good case in point for why I do this. There's nowhere, he just doesn't have the office space to devote for that. Probably the building manager would not want that happening in the office, so I have to mix water on site. Now when I pour water in the top, I always come back down because I may need to modulate the level in the skimmer as the water comes down and raises the level in the skimmer. This is something I gotta keep track of a lot. With this, I use these that I got off of Amazon. And in a lot of situations, I don't clean in there when it's doing this. In this situation, sometimes it's a little difficult to get this out. It doesn't really hurt anything, and I'm changing a bit of water too, so I'll go around here, clean the inside, try to get down here. And again, with this wet skimming, of course this is like one of the first buckets, but I mean look at the quality or lack thereof of the water coming out of here. So it's not like just drawing water out of there, or even it's not the way I'll do it every single time, because every now and then I will actually gravel back a section of the tank. So I mix it up, but I rarely ever just pull water out. I'm usually either wet skimming or gravel backing. I saw this little frag that pinched off of this Space Invaders Pectinia. It fragged itself. So I will take that and take it to my house or take it to the next client. So maybe some people think that like cleaning an aquarium, you're just like in and out. But again, if you don't do a little bit of careful observation about even the health of the tank itself, but what you just did, that's where you leave yourself open to sprinting out the door and having closed a valve that's supposed to be open, or messed with something that you didn't put back to its proper. So I'll always sit down at the very end and I clean those bags, I put new carbon in, I clean the poly filter, I dumped the Avast locker, skimming locker, and so it's good to go. I look at the skimmer, it's trying to pull out some junk, but it's maybe a little too crazy, so I'll pull it down. I'll put the top on back where it's supposed to be. Sort of run through the checklist. I changed the water, I redid the dose. So if I recount these things in my head and even say them out loud, I'll say, so I altered how much it's dosing AFR, and then I'll just know that, so anything associated with that I'll run through my head that I did, being sure that I saved it and whatnot. And then now sitting here on the floor, you know, I'll look upwards at it. I mean, obviously now I see that I had to go get the paper towel and buff it, but I'll make sure I didn't see any from these angles. Some big swath of algae I left inside of there. Clean the shrouds for the vortex, everything like that. Nothing looks weird. And one of the very last things that I'll do, again, being pretty diligent with the salinity, you know, I made all these changes and I gave it some time. When I did the water change, the salinity was a little high, so I let the top off run for a little bit. So I want to see, do a little bit of time and see, bam, right on 35. So we're good to go. I want to double check. It's the first thing I do when I get to a tank because I want to have a feeling for what I'm about to do. And then I'll double check it when I'm leaving, because I don't want to be in such a rush I leave out of here and I altered the salinity to where it's not supposed to be. It's worth that 5 minutes for me to observe and think about these things before I leave, then rush out of here to the next one and just leave a trail of messed up tanks behind me. That was not easy to do. And the only one he gets mad at is the foxglove. This was a mistake too, putting a male swamp in us, because man, he harasses them. See his little dancing. Come on, leave me alone. I might try to catch him out with another female. In this iteration, I've had him as a client for a long time, but we replaced all this. The tank as it sits here is only a year old. Only about a year old at this point. A little bit of cyano right there you take care of, but look at that huge turbine. Right next to a red-banded trochus, a huge turbine. I'm obsessed with spring rye. I have several spring rye in here. This clown's about 10 years old. This is from his last aquarium. I always liked him because he had a sort of a miss bar that didn't connect. Or she. Oh, he wanted to get mad. It's like the bigger you are, the madder he gets. I like that maneuver right into the clam. Yeah, there's another big turban. Like those. They get big like a zebra trochus. This is a 200-gallon aquarium that the client had specified 1-inch thick glass on this 200-gallon aquarium, even though I told the client that it was not necessary. It's what they wanted. So it's a very thick, and it used to be 2 separate rooms with an archway right here, and we stuck the tank in the middle, and my uncle, who's a carpenter, did all the carpentry right here. Separate the rooms. So again, every tank's not perfect, and I've been fighting this year-long battle with red planaria, red flatworms. And yes, of course you could use something like Salifert flatworm exit, but you can't do that when there's a large amount of them in there because the amount of toxins that they could release. You can see a little bit of them there on the Blue Ridge coral. They're on the substrate. And so I'd want to, if I was going to use flatworm exit, I would want to minimize it so I could look into the tank and just see a spattering of it. Because this is where I caution people, because a tank that is older like this tank is about 10 years old, and there's so many crevices and nooks and crannies, you might not think that there's very many flatworms in it. And then when you go to kill them, it's just a massive amount. And that makes doing that much more tricky. Because if I ever used flatworm exit on something, I only want to do it when there's not a massive amount. Otherwise, it's problematic. And I've lost fish before doing stuff like that. So I've been trying to gravel vac and disrupt them and use the marine lint filter and all sorts of stuff to minimize them. I'm just sort of waiting for them to collapse on their own. I've tried this is case in point. I've tried to use Springer eye damsels, which I love anyways, but I have 2 Springer eye damsels in here under the assumption they would eat flatworms, red planaria. Haven't done it. It's funny that, I mean, I know they don't call it anymore, but that Parazoanthus gracilis, that yellow. Old school, old school. So underneath this Monopora capricornus right here, you see this like rubble placed on there. There's a black cat basslet, and actually he's down over here right now, but he goes and I didn't know they do this. He places this rubble here and he has sort of like a chamber in between the leaves of that Monopora capricornus. And I didn't even know it was him until I stood back one time and I was watching him do it. This is a bubble coral, scientific name Plerogyra sinuosa. And this one's crazy. I've been around this one for a decade. And I have other pictures of it. It's, gone through all these changes. I've actually, it started budding off of the back I'm not talking about a frag, I'm talking about a piece the size of my fist. 2 different bubble corals in 2 different other my tanks. I waited till these things grew way off, and I broke the base of it and put it, and now they're almost, you know, in their tanks almost this big respectively. But there was certain times where this one would open up. It was almost 2 feet across. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure many other people out there have big bubble corals, but I wonder how many are out there that are, you know, get up to 2 feet across. So this is just, I'm sure this is just a fungia, but the story behind this one right here, when I first set this tank up about 10 years ago, I had, it's mostly dry rock, but I had 1 piece of actual live rock. And I remember at one time seeing this little glowing speck on the rock. Waited a year, it started to, and it was such a small coral, it took a long time for me to understand even what it was. And then one day it grew big enough, I realized it was a fungia, just off of a piece of live rock. It's not a coral that we had in here before. And I busted it off when it, you know, once it got about that big, put it there, and now it's bigger than my hand. But that's one of the few corals I've had that no one purchased. It just grew right out of a piece of live rock. That we did right before this, there was a pectinia that fragged itself, pinched itself off here. It leaves me no place to super glue, so I can't super glue it in place. I want to put it in this tank, and what I'll usually do for this is either find a bare rock surface to lay it down and sort of hope that it attaches on there, keep an eye on it over time, or as long as there's not a lot of sand sifters in the tank, sometimes just set it on the substrate and just keep tabs on it over time. Again, one of the first things that I will do on a reef tank is check the alkalinity before I do anything to it. I don't want to alter it and then check it. 4, 5, uh-oh. So that's about 5. And my dosing liquid's out, so I need to go home tonight and make some more dosing liquid and probably come back here tomorrow morning to fill that up, because if I'm getting 5 DKH on there, you know, it's pretty low, very low, so I need to address that, get that going again. I mixed this salt, and you know, I'm looking to look down the middle, see no undissolved salt, and I want that clarity there. So this is only like 5 to 10 minutes, and then at that time I will double check the salinity. So that's actually a little low, about 27. This one is 40. So what I've done in the past that's worked well for me, and again, I wouldn't do this on a smaller tank, but on a bigger tank, I could sit here and do the math to run the average, but I'll use it, this one's a little high, this one's a little low. I'll use it for the water change, again, not in a smaller tank, but in a bigger tank. And then I'll double check the tank. I mean, technically I could go through and alter these out, but these are close enough. This is over 5 and this is below 5. So I feel like that averages out. know what I should do. This is one of my ones that had a DJ thing on it, but some of the fuses have gone off on some of the switches. And while these are cool, I think a lot of times they're prone to having some of the switches go out. Maybe I'll address that here. Not a lot of these clients' accounts have Neptune Apexes on them, and I could be judged by that for some of my peers. But again, it depends how useful I think that it would be to a system. There's obviously very useful things on that to give me an alert, but maybe this isn't an excuse, but I have been doing this for a long time, so I know how to set up my tanks to minimize that stuff. And in a situation where I don't think how I've set it up can minimize that enough is when I will go in with a Neptune Apex. But at the same time, I'm also slowly coming around, and I'm seeing more validity for putting on Neptune Apex. So there might be a time a year or two from now where I'll go through and put a Neptune Apex on everything. It's just the situation I never wanted to be caught in is having a system be overly complicated like that, and I'm sitting there troubleshooting an Apex when I'm supposed to be changing water, testing alkalinity, stuff like that, cleaning a skimmer. Because if I'd either be charging the client too much for what I'm doing and not find anyone to pay for all that, or shortchanging myself by being stuck troubleshooting something like that, but the client's not going to pay for all that extraness. So it can be a conundrum sometimes. You'd want to control and have overwatch on all this, but it could sometimes be a problem. Again, I feel like wet skimming is like a concentrated water change. It can also tell me a lot by what I pull out. Some of the other tanks that we've filmed me doing this to, you can see horrid water in the wet skimming bucket. And so again, little observations, like I'll judge this, like I just wet skimmed out these two buckets. I mean, you see a little bit of, protein laden bubbles, but not like some of the other tanks. So, I know as far as protein content, this is a pretty large skimmer for this size tank, and I'm just not getting very dirty water out of here. So that sort of tells me a good sign, that as far as the visually seeing like protein content that I could pull out of the water seems to be in a pretty good position. But again, this tank is very mature, lots of very grown out corals. So again, a mind story, but I'm thinking that a lot of the nutrients in a tank like this is getting pulled out by the corals, and this oversized skimmer doing a lot of work. So that's a good sign, I think. Here's our little Pectinia frag that I just want it to grow out and create some sort of base, and then I'll find somewhere to put it. In a tank like this, if there was a lot of sand sifters, I'd be careful with that because it could get buried. If you look right here, here's an interesting interaction I've been watching. That's just white pulsing xenia, and that's Bernard Pora right there. And I've found that Bernard Pora stings or irritates pretty badly, and I didn't know what they would do in this interaction. The funny thing, last time I was here, I had to pull out some of the xenia because it was almost trying to overgrow, but they don't seem to be, they're not harming each other. They're just sort of, the xenia is just trying to smother it, so I just keep fighting it back. This Euphilia, this purple and green hammer coral, I super glued using Richard's method, super glued it right to the side of this pillar. Put this one in here. I just jammed that one into the rocks. There's a fair amount of old school Discosoma mushrooms in here that have been here for a long time. There's a neat little patch of Cephastria growing there. They don't require a lot of light, so that's sort of off to the side, and it's happy right there. There's always been this coral banded is like 5 years old. Coral banded that always stays in this cave back behind there. right over here, this has been interesting for me because that's Montipora Spongiotes. But it's taken a weird growth pattern, which could be due to light or could be due to water motion, but it's growing more like a Montipora capricornis and not spiring up too much. And then one of my favorite corals in here, which has been here for 10 years, it's a favia, and I think people call it a dragon soul favia, but it's actually been around for so long it is growing onto the rocks, which that coral grows pretty slowly. Again, with the obsessiveness of the salinity, first thing I check, last thing I check. I do all my maintenance activities, then I might give it, might take about 5 minutes to make some observations, go through my checklist, change the water, I change the carbon, I change the poly filter, did I tweak anything? No. Did I put the skimmer back to where I want it? Adjust it a little bit. So I will take that time to let whatever I've done with the water change and the salinity to work its course. I want the water to have flown and turn over a couple times. Then I'll check it. Boom, right on the money, 35. So at the beginning of this, it was slightly off. It was about 34. And then I had accidentally mixed this bucket to 40 and this bucket to about 30. And I was hoping that it would all even out in the wash, and it in fact has done that. So that's, again, I caution that on a smaller tank, and I also caution that if you haven't been doing this for a long time, but I have been doing this for a long time, and case in point, it did come out in the wash. It brought this back up to 35 where I wanted it. So